Hi everyone. So for part two of my coming out story, I wanted to talk about how I can relate from my psychology class to sexuality. And I touched upon psychology a little bit in my previous coming out video, but I wanted to dive in deeper here. And so I took psychology my senior year of high school, and it was my favorite academic class I've ever taken, since I could just relate so much of it to everyday life. But I wanted to explain how what I've learned in psychology can be related to homosexuality. So I'm going to talk about a few psychological principles, starting with classical conditioning. So classical conditioning is a way that people learn where we come to associate things that are neutral to things that evoke some kind of emotion in us. So, for example, let's say a singer sings one of your favorite songs. The singer you originally feel neutral about, but then because you love the song that the singer sang, you would come to associate the singer with positivity. So the singer is transformed from a neutral stimulus to a conditioned stimulus. And so in the case of sexuality, the word gay at first is just a neutral word. It's just a 3-letter word. So it's just a neutral stimulus. But then it becomes a conditioned stimulus when it's used in certain contexts and with a certain tone of voice. So if someone says, let's say, "That's so gay," then the word gay is associated with like lameness and inferiority, which we come to, so then we end up associating the word with lameness and inferiority. And I remember must have been like the 5th grade, and my dad was watching a movie where these two guys go back and forth saying, "You know how I know that you're gay?" And they go on for like 30 seconds just like saying it back and forth and then saying derogatory things to each other. And so it's like instances like that, among other things, that have made me classically conditioned to associate homosexuality with negativity. And so this results in internalized homophobia, where people who are not straight still take a while to accept themselves. And so that's why I can sometimes still get anxious when someone says the word gay, or I see a homosexual couple, because of this resulting from the classical conditioning. And it's really hard to reverse this classical conditioning, but thankfully I've become more comfortable talking about sexuality since I hung out with a couple friends this summer and we were able to openly talk about homosexuality. So it's slowly making me more comfortable. And this is why it's so important to have positive representation in the media, so that kids can grow up seeing homosexuality used in a positive context. So like that show Andy Mack that I talked about in my previous coming out video, with the first Disney character to say the word gay, I think that's going to help out a lot of children. And in children's books too, I think we're getting more books that feature homosexual characters to show children that they're just regular people. And this representation is not necessarily to promote homosexuality itself, but it's just to let kids know that if they do happen to turn out non-straight, that it's okay, and they shouldn't feel the need to suppress those feelings. And I think some parents might worry that this representation will, say, like turn their kids gay, but I don't really think that's a valid argument, since I think the kids were likely going to turn out gay anyway, and the shows are just, and the representation is just making the kids feel more confident with themselves. And so people shouldn't mistake correlation for causation. Just because kids see homosexual characters, that doesn't mean it's going to cause them to be gay. They're just becoming more confident with themselves by seeing themselves represented. And so next I'm going to go into memory. So what's interesting about long-term memory is that it's essentially infinite. So the memories are stored in I believe it's the cerebral cortex. And to get these memories out, we just need enough retrieval cues. And some of these retrieval cues are easier to access than others. But for me, they happen to be easier for accessing memories. So, for example, band acts as a retrieval cue for me. Band brings up a time when, so I was, I think, a sophomore on the bus, and I was talking to a freshman about our plans for the weekend. and I said I was going to be playing in the pep band at the football game. And he decides to say, "That's gay." Whatever that's supposed to mean, I guess. I don't know why he felt the need to say that, but yeah. So that's how things that I would normally feel positively about, like band, can bring up memories of sexuality. And we also remember things that have more personal significance to us. So like straight people might have a harder time remembering the times when they've used the word gay loosely. But for people like me, it's a lot easier to remember those instances because of how personal it is to me. And having a good memory means you remember the bad stuff easier. So like I'd say I have a pretty good memory. I memorized 314 digits of pi on Pi Day. But so what memory can be both a blessing and a curse, because then I remember the bad stuff. And next I want to talk about Freudian defense mechanisms. So I touched upon these in my previous video, and I wanted to talk about them a little bit more. So one of them is repression, where so that ties back to the internalized homophobia I talked about earlier, where people who are not straight try to repress their feelings since they feel kind of guilty about them. And so that's why, according to the Trevor Project, an estimated 1.8 million LGBTQ plus youth seriously considered suicide in the past year because they feel the need to repress their feelings and feel ashamed about them. And it also doesn't help that it's fairly common knowledge that homosexuality is punishable by death in some countries. So then gay people can kind of almost feel guilty as if they committed like an internal crime. And I'm not religious myself, but I know that in some religions, homosexuality is considered a sin. So for children who do grow up in these religions, they really feel the need to repress their sexuality. And so another Freudian defense mechanism is compensation, where basically people try to compensate something they're not good at with something that they're skilled at, or something that they don't like about themselves with something that they're skilled at. So I noticed that a little bit of my motivation to do really well in math and science was because of my sexuality. I'm not saying that sexuality is the only reason. If I was straight, I would still love math and science. But sexuality is a little bit of the reason why I really strive to prove myself in the STEM fields. And again, I got my school science department award, so I think I have proven myself. And another Freudian defense mechanism is sublimation, where we try to find like a creative outlet to let out our negative energy and transform it into positive energy. And so I've done that with music. Music has definitely helped me a lot, and I'm definitely going to continue to use music in the future. So next up, I want to dive into theories of homosexuality. So some of these theories are definitely better than others, and I'm going to talk about kind of one of the worst theories, and then go up to more supported theories. So first we've got the Freudian theory, where children are supposed to have like an Oedipus complex that they resolve, where ordinarily boys would grow up, according to Sigmund Freud, jealous of their fathers, and then pursue women to marry. And so that would be considered resolving their Oedipus complex. Whereas homosexuals would have an unresolved Oedipus complex, where they grow up jealous of their mothers instead. But Freud's theory really is just not backed up by scientific evidence. But a better theory would be the evolutionary theory. So of course it's counterintuitive that homosexual people would exist, since homosexuals before modern scientific technology couldn't naturally have children. And so there's a theory called the gay uncle hypothesis, where, so evolutionarily speaking, the goal of a species is not for any particular individual to survive and reproduce, but for the species as a whole to survive and reproduce. So let's say that a man happens to be gay and he has a straight brother with a child. So that gay man is an uncle. So then while that man may not have any children, he can help nurture his nephew or niece so that the nephew or niece has a better chance of having children. So that in turn may not help the gay man, but it does help the family and therefore the species. So that's one of the evolutionary theories. But then I think the theory that makes the most sense is the biological theory. So that's like genes, prenatal hormones that seem to influence sexuality. We actually learned in psychology class that if an identical twin is gay, there's a 50% chance the other one is too. So that shows that there is a large influence of nature as opposed to nurture. And as I said in my previous video, it wouldn't make sense to want to be part of a stigmatized community, which is why the biological theories seem like to make the most sense. So next up, I want to go into social psychology and talk about stereotypes. So stereotypes, I just want to say, people don't always make them with bad intent. Like there's a stereotype, for example, that men are really good at fixing things, and being able to fix things is not a bad thing. But the problem with stereotypes is that they tend to put people into boxes, so then people feel inadequate when they don't live up to these expectations. So I've seen that, for example, with like gay people I think are kind of stereotyped for being like good at musical theater and dancing. And don't get me wrong, I think musical theater is great. I was in the orchestra for my school's musical this year, and they put on a phenomenal musical. But I'm an awful dancer, and I'm really into STEM. So STEM kind of intimidates me a little bit, since non-straight people are often not associated with STEM. But I think I'm becoming more confident with STEM. And I got accepted into a college program that's like a STEM mentoring program, so I'm excited for that. And we've also seen a better representation recently with non-straight people in areas that straight people tend to dominate. Like on America's Got Talent, we have an openly gay country singer who's really good. On shows like Jeopardy and Wheel of Fortune, we have non-straight people. So that representation is helping to show people what non-straight people are capable of. And it's also worth noting that when one does not fit the stereotypes, people can be kind of less mindful of their language. So what I mean by that is, like, if you pass me on the street, I'm not the type of person where you can automatically tell that I'm not straight. And so in that case, people are kind of less conscientious of the language that they're using. So people might think it's okay to use the word gay loosely or insulting terms for homosexuals around me. Whereas if I was very openly gay, people I think would be more aware of what they're saying. And so then I want to end this video with positive psychology. There's a whole branch of psychology just devoted to positivity, so I wanted to talk about that. So according to a recent Gallup poll, 67% of Americans support same-sex marriage, so about 2 in 3, which is tied for the highest it's ever been. And that's compared to only 27% of Americans supporting same-sex marriage in 1996. So it's improved quite a bit. And there's also a show called What Would You Do? One of my favorite shows on ABC where they have like actors and actresses doing these scenes, and they show how everyday people react to them. So like they did a scene, for example, where they mimicked the Masterpiece Cake Shop wedding cake refusal, this time to a lesbian couple. And some of the reactions that people had were really good, standing up for the couple. So that show helps to preserve my faith in humanity, restores my faith in humanity. And we've seen a lot of progress in just the last decade. The legalization of same-sex marriage, the Supreme Court ruling that you can't be fired for your sexuality, better media representation, and coming out videos on YouTube that have helped me. And not to tie the coronavirus into it, but I think it's helping people see that because of how devastating this virus is, causing so many deaths, people I think are less concerned now if 2 guys or 2 girls are getting married. Because there's a lot worse things going on in the world than 2 people who love each other. And so that wraps up this video. Thank you guys so much for listening to this rant.